I wasn't born to lead. At least, that's what they decided for me the moment I entered this world, a girl. The third child. The soft one. Not like my older brothers, Thomas and Andrew, who were groomed in boardrooms and given mini briefcases before they could spell equity. No, I was the accessory to a legacy I wasn't allowed to inherit. They dressed me in pastel for the company gala, had me wave in photographs like a trained mannequin. And when I asked a question about operations during dinner, my father didn't even look up from his wine. He just said, "Leave the business talk to the ones who understand it." That was the first cut, but not the last. I spent my early 20s bouncing between internships at partner companies, none of them real roles. They called it experience. What it was exile. They didn't want me in the room when deals were made. Didn't want my name on the board. Didn't want me to believe I had anything to offer. And still, I watched, I listened, I learned. In silence. There was a moment clear as day, scorched into my memory. The family was hosting its quarterly strategy summit. The air was thick with cologne, ego, and words like synergy and vertical integration. Everyone sat in a perfect U shape around the mahogany table. I was at the edge, next to the water pitcher. I had studied the reports. I saw something none of them noticed, an emerging tech competitor silently buying into our supply chain, so I spoke. There's a pattern in the procurement contracts 3 vendors recently acquired by the same parent company. They're consolidating leverage. We're being boxed in. For a second, just 1 second, the room went still. Until Thomas laughed. Not a soft chuckle, a full-bodied, arrogant, "Who let the intern talk?" kind of laugh. Then he said it. "Tell me, little sister, when did you become our chief strategist? Wait, did you even finish your undergrad yet?" Laughter followed, even from my mother. My own mother? I nodded, sat back, and wrote the name of that parent company on a napkin. 6 months later, we lost a $20 million contract. No one remembered what I said, but I did. I remembered everything. They used to say, "You're not ready. You don't understand what it takes." But what they didn't understand was that I didn't want to be ready. I wanted to be undeniable. So I did something reckless, at least by their standards. I applied to every night course I could find: finance, negotiation, strategic management. I worked at a coffee shop in the mornings to pay for them. Yes, me. A legacy heiress, pouring cold brew and scrubbing counters so I could afford to learn what they kept behind locked doors. They mocked me. "Why don't you just marry a CEO and save yourself the effort? Don't waste your time. Our company doesn't need more assistants." They called me dramatic, sensitive, a disappointment. And still, I kept going. There's a different kind of strength that comes from silence. From knowing you don't have anyone cheering for you. From having to become your own proof. And that silence became my sanctuary. While they flew first class, I rode the night bus home with my textbooks. While they networked at golf resorts, I built spreadsheets from scratch in a shoebox apartment. And while they prepared to inherit, I prepared to disrupt. The final straw came during grandfather's will reading. I thought naively, stupidly, that he saw me, that he might have left me something more than a token. He always told me, "The sharpest minds speak the softest." I held on to that, believed it was for me. But no, Thomas got the executive chair, Andrew got the stock options, I got an emerald brooch. "Your grandfather thought it would suit your style," the lawyer said. My father didn't even look at me. And my brother's Thomas turned to me with that smirk I knew too well and whispered, "You'll always be pretty, just not powerful." I left without saying a word. That night, I stared at the brooch, held it in my hand until my fingers ached, and I made a promise to myself. They will not remember me as the girl in the corner. They will remember me as the one who bought the building they work in. And so began the war they never saw coming. But before war comes the weapon. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for my seat at their table. I started building my own. They thought it was over, that I'd disappear, settle into a quiet life funded by guilt checks and family embarrassment, that I'd grow old in a pretty little cage decorated in emerald brooches and sealed shut with silence. But they underestimated the one thing they couldn't quantify: hunger. The hunger to matter, to reclaim every moment they stole from me with their smiles and their dismissals, to walk back into that world not asking for a seat at their table but owning the goddamn building they're sitting in. After the will reading, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and left. No tearful goodbye, no dramatic confrontation, just absence. Sometimes, the loudest scream is walking away without a word. I rented a 500 square foot apartment in a part of town they wouldn't dare park in. No elevators, no doorman, just stairs and roaches and one flickering hallway light. And still, for the first time in my life, I felt free. I got a job bussing tables at a 24-hour diner. The manager looked at my last name and said, "You know you share a name with the guys who own that massive logistics firm downtown." I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "They're cousins." I worked nights, studied days, accounting, M&A law, startup formation, anything they said I wasn't qualified for. I devoured like scripture. I stopped wearing perfume, stopped straightening my hair, stripped away every layer of softness they once used to keep me harmless. I wasn't building a brand. I was forging a weapon. Then, one evening, as I scrubbed a ketchup-stained menu off the floor, a man in a suit spilled coffee on his sleeve. He cursed under his breath. I brought him napkins, then asked, half out of instinct, half out of habit, "Your fourth acquisition this year?" He paused. I pointed to the tablet he'd left open. "That legal structure, Delaware Series LLC. Most people don't use it unless they're hiding investors." He looked at me like I'd just spoken in tongues, then smiled. "You want a job?" That's how I met Gabriel Park, founder, investor, mercenary in a tailored suit. He wasn't impressed by pedigree. He was impressed by pain, by people who'd been underestimated so long they became invisible weapons. He hired me as a research analyst. Within 4 months, I became his shadow. He taught me everything: how to read a term sheet like a lie detector, how to identify a company's soul not from its website, but from the 3 lines hidden in its debt schedule, how to weaponize timing in a hostile acquisition. He didn't coddle, didn't praise. He just handed me war tools and said, "Survive." And I did more than survive. I became lethal. In our 7th month working together, he pulled me aside. "You ever think about starting something of your own?" I hesitated. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as someone who wants to stay behind the curtain forever." I smiled. "I don't want a curtain." I said, "I want the stage." So we made a deal. He'd back me, quietly. No names, no headlines. In return, I'd make him 10x his money in 5 years. I spent the next 6 months structuring shell companies, buying slivers of undervalued logistics startups, and studying one specific industry: freight optimization, the very foundation of my family's empire, the skeleton under their skin. I formed Nova Strategic Holdings, a no-face firm built in silence, with hands in places they'd never think to look. And I made sure every company I touched had contracts with Ashford and Coity, my family's company. Every invoice, every supply chain pivot, every outsourced vendor they celebrated as a cost-saving innovation was mine. By the time the fiscal year ended, I controlled 18% of their operational pipeline through third-party vendors. They were bleeding power, and they didn't even know it. And I wasn't done. I went after stock, minority shareholders, disgruntled employees, silent partners, anyone with even a sliver of voting rights. I didn't knock on doors. I bought the land underneath them. There was a moment, about a year in, when I saw a photo on a business news site. My brother Thomas, shaking hands with the CEO of a newly acquired logistics partner. They were grinning like kings, announcing some brilliant merger that would modernize the Ashford freight model. What they didn't know was that I was the CEO. Through 4 layers of corporate veils, shell entities, and silent holdings, I owned the company they just signed. I remember sitting alone at my kitchen counter, drinking cheap wine, staring at the article. And for the first time in years, I laughed. They shut the door on me, bolted it, boarded it up. So I built a new one, stronger, smarter, with reinforced steel made from every insult they ever threw at me. And now I have the keys. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they celebrate. My family celebrated like winners: loud, indulgent, arrogant. But winners don't gloat, not when they understand the rules, and certainly not when the scoreboard is being rewritten behind their backs. That year, the Ashfords toasted to record efficiency, to new partners, new technology, leaner operations. What they didn't realize was that I was all of it. The partners, the technology, the operations, me. Every announcement they made became my punchline. Thomas stood on stage at the Global Freight Conference, proudly stating, We've streamlined our supplier matrix by 20% this quarter. Our vendors are sharper, faster, cheaper. Yes, Thomas, because I built them that way, because I planted them there. Behind every flashy merger was a contract signed with one of my shell firms. Behind every breakthrough logistics solution was an algorithm I paid to build, licensed under a proxy, and leased back to them at triple cost. They were paying me to optimize their own demise. And what was I doing during all this? Wearing heels, throwing galas, posting pictures from Bali? No, I was in an unmarked office suite with 2 laptops, 4 burner phones, and a 3-person legal team working around the clock. I was mapping every board member's voting behavior, tracking every clause in the shareholder bylaws, buying silence, earning leverage, collecting. The real game wasn't the market, it was the boardroom. That's where power changed hands, not with applause, but with signatures. I needed 51%. That number lived in my mind like a pulse, throbbing, ticking, breathing beside me every night I fell asleep with spreadsheets open on my chest. I started with the quiet ones, the passive investors who were tired of Thomas's ego, the retired CFO who still had voting shares but no patience for politics, the woman who lost her seat in a restructure 5 years ago, forgotten, bitter, and just waiting to sell. I bought 1, then 2, then 7. I created a side entity, Orion Trust, registered out of a silent Cayman affiliate. Every deal was made through that vehicle. No trace, no fingerprints, just capital and patience. By the time the next fiscal report was issued, I owned 43%. Privately, legally, absolutely. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. Not until I had the dagger, the stage, and their full attention. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is best served quiet. There was a gala Ashford's 75th anniversary, and everyone who mattered was there. The mayor, CEOs, international partners, press. Thomas stood at the podium like he always did, basking in artificial legacy. He wore father's cufflinks, used grandfather's phrases, tried so hard to embody men who built the empire he was slowly dismantling with ego and incompetence. He raised a glass and said, "To the next generation, may they carry the torch with honor." And I stood in the back of that golden ballroom, holding my champagne, knowing that torch was already in my hand. They thought I'd left the narrative, but I was writing the final chapter. And the ending wasn't a bang, it was paperwork. The next morning, I filed a formal notice of majority interest acquisition under corporate law. Effective immediately, all executive decisions required consultation with the controlling shareholder. Guess who that was? I didn't send it to the press, didn't post it online. I sent it to Thomas, personally, in a leather envelope. No return name, just the company seal. Inside, one line: I wasn't qualified to sit at your table, so I bought the whole damn floor. He didn't call, didn't write, but I know he read it. Because 2 days later, a meeting request appeared on my calendar, subject line, urgent Ashford board crisis. I smiled. You know what they don't teach in business school? How to look someone in the eye when they realize the monster they've been mocking has become their shadow. How to keep your voice steady when the man who once told you to stay in your lane has to call you ma'am. I spent that week tying up loose ends, rewriting the board rules, securing indemnity clauses, preparing to walk in not as the forgotten daughter, but as the owner. People think revenge has to be dramatic, explosive, loud, but that's what the weak believe. The ones who want attention, not power. Power is quiet, patient, precise. They celebrated, I collected, and now I was ready for the final reveal. Not a press release, not a headline, just one meeting, one door, one room, one seat at the head of the table, with my name already engraved. The elevator ride felt eternal. I stood alone, watching the numbers blink one by one, each floor taking me closer to the moment they never saw coming. My reflection stared back from the metal doors, calm, composed, unreadable. Not the girl who once stood at this very building's entrance, begging to be included, desperate to belong. That girl died the day they laughed at me. This version, she doesn't ask, she arrives. The top floor hadn't changed, still the same cold marble, still the same pretentious art pieces meant to signal legacy. But legacy built on exclusion is not legacy. It's rot in a tailored suit. I walked past the receptionist. She blinked. Do you have an appointment? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because when you own the company, you don't announce your presence. Your presence announces you. The boardroom was already full, 12 members, all men, except for Cynthia Ross, vice president of marketing, the only one who ever looked me in the eye years ago, when they iced me out. Thomas sat at the head of the table. Of course he did. My father used to say that power is inherited. He was wrong. Power is claimed. I stepped in. Silence fell like a curtain. Chairs shifted, papers rustled. Thomas blinked, visibly confused. "What's this?" he muttered, trying to laugh it off. "Did someone invite a spectator?" I didn't smile. I pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. The head. Set my leather folder down. Opened it. Unfolded the legal acquisition documents, the ones no one had seen coming. "We're not here for a vote. Thomas." He raised a brow. "We, who's we?" I met his eyes. "We, the controlling shareholders," and then I dropped it. The legal memo. Stamped, notarized, bulletproof. Ownership 51.4%, majority control transferred. To me. He stood up, hands gripping the edge of the table like he could stop time. "This is a joke. It's binding," I replied, cool as steel. "We've passed the reporting window. It's effective immediately." "Who the hell approved this?" Cynthia spoke. Quiet, firm. "You did. Through automatic proxy acceptance clauses. It's all valid." Thomas turned red, then pale, then red again. Red. Andrew slammed his pen. "You went behind our backs, bought up shares like a thief." "No," I said, eyes locked on his. "I bought them like a strategist. Like someone who's been told their whole life they weren't enough, and finally decided to stop believing it." I stood, leveled my voice, let the silence wrap around every word like velvet over a blade. "You said I wasn't qualified, that I didn't belong here, that I'd never understand what it takes to run a legacy." I leaned forward. "And yet every decision I've made in the past 2 years has saved this company from its own arrogance." I clicked the remote. The projector screen lit up. Slide after slide. Proof of the cost savings my entities provided. The supply chain efficiency. The contracts they paraded around in press releases, all mine. They had celebrated them as their victories, never realizing they were feeding their empire's heart straight into my hands. Thomas was frozen. Andrew, furious. "You'll destroy everything," he spat. "You're not ready for this kind of power." I tilted my head. "Funny. That's what you said when I suggested we diversify freight operations, right before you lost us the Arizona contract." I looked around the room. "I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here to lead what you couldn't." And then I made it official, pulled out the new leadership slate, effective immediately. Thomas Ashford, removed from CEO position. Andrew Ashford, reassigned to logistics advisor, non-voting role. Board chair, vacant, pending nomination. I paused. As controlling shareholder, I nominate myself for chair. No one objected. They couldn't, because power doesn't scream, it signs. I turned to Thomas one last time. His jaw was clenched, sweat on his brow, the fall from power clinging to him like a storm he couldn't outrun. "You built this place on arrogance," I said. "I'll rebuild it on truth." He opened his mouth, closed it again. He knew it was over. That afternoon, the office felt different. Lighter. Even the walls, somehow, seemed to exhale. I walked to what used to be Thomas's office, paused, then turned. Walked down the hall to the west wing, to the smaller corner space, fewer windows, no view, but more real, more earned. Because I didn't need a throne. I didn't need the view. I just needed the keys. Power doesn't echo. It settles. It hums beneath the floorboards, reshaping the very foundation without a sound. It's been 3 months since I took over. The walls of Ashford and Company are no longer coated in arrogance and thinly veiled entitlement. Now, they're lined with progress, efficiency, and, above all, clarity. The first thing I did, I removed every portrait on the executive floor. My grandfather's stern oil painting, my father's smug handshake with the mayor, even Thomas's self-commissioned Forbes cover mock-up, gone. I replaced them with one sentence. Laser-etched in brushed steel, earned, not given. That's the only legacy worth preserving. They expected I'd run the company like a vendetta, that I'd strip them bare in revenge, make a spectacle, bleed them dry. But I didn't take the company for revenge. I took it because it was mine, built from the silence they handed me, forged in the shadows they thought would swallow me whole. I rebuilt Ashford and Cody, the same way I rebuilt myself, not loudly, but with intention. I shut down the useless subsidiaries Thomas kept alive to feed his ego, terminated fake consultants billing 6 figures for nothing, reinstated 3 women whose careers were quietly derailed by my brothers behind closed doors. And I made them directors, because power shouldn't hoard, it should elevate. One afternoon, Cynthia Ross stopped by my new office. She looked around, smiled. "Funny," she said. "You chose the smallest office on the floor." I sipped my tea. I chose the only one that felt earned. She nodded. Didn't say more. We understood each other. Andrew left quietly. No grand gesture. No farewell. He cleared out his desk and emailed a resignation with one line. She played the long game. We never stood a chance. Thomas was different. He fought. Lawyers, interviews, leaks to the press. He tried everything to claw back what he never built in the first place. But in the end, even the media stopped listening. Because the story wasn't about the prince who lost his crown. It was about the girl who never needed one to rule. I hosted one press conference. Just one. No flash. No drama. I stood in a gray suit minimalist. Clean, real, and read from a single page. This company will no longer be defined by names written on birth certificates. It will be defined by the work. By the people who wake up every day ready to build. Not inherit. We're not chasing a legacy anymore. We're rewriting one. That speech reached 3.7 million views in 24 hours. But I didn't care about the numbers. I cared about one email. From a former intern, fired by Thomas for being too ambitious. She wrote, "I applied again. This time, I believe someone like me has a shot." I hired her the same day. I don't keep the emerald brooch anymore. I donated it to a museum's Power and Symbolism exhibit. Next to it, a plaque reads, "Given to someone deemed unworthy, now owned by the one who redefined worth." People say legacy is inherited, but I've learned legacy is the echo of choices no one clapped for. It's built in silence, and it speaks long after you've left the room. Some days, I still walk past the building lobby. The guards nod, the staff greet me. They call me Ms. Ashford, but I don't flinch at the name anymore, because now, it doesn't carry their shadow, it carries mine. The final board meeting of the fiscal year came last week. New seats, new faces, young, diverse, sharp. Not one of them bore the last name Ashford, and that's the real victory. Because I didn't just walk back into the company, I walked in as its transformation, not the heir, the architect. As the meeting ended, one of the younger VPs stayed behind, nervous, clutching a notepad, eyes full of questions. He finally asked, "Do you ever regret how you did it, the secrecy, the silence, the long road?" I smiled, every day, then paused, and I'd do it exactly the same way, every time. Because when they told me I wasn't qualified, what they really meant was, "You're not one of us." And they were right, I was better.